Hi everyone, welcome to this session with Christiana Figueres. I'm Mark Dooley, Global Head of Macquarie's Green Investment Group. You might recall that Green Investment Group resulted from our acquisition of the UK Green Investment Bank back in 2017, thus creating a really substantial global investor in renewable energy projects. I'm really pleased to say that since that time, we've now become a developer as well. We've moved earlier in the project lifecycle because that's where we thought we could have the biggest impact. And we've now got 30 gigawatts of renewable energy projects in development around the world. To give you a sense of scale, that's about 3/5 of the UK's peak load. So we're here as a developer, and that's a way to think about us. But let's talk about Christiana. Wonderful to have you here today, Christiana. So Christiana is a founding partner. Christiana is a founding partner of Global Optimism and a globally recognised leader on climate change, a field in which she's worked tirelessly for 30 years. She was the Executive Secretary of the UN Framework Convention for Climate Change from 2010 to 2016, responsible for delivery of the landmark Paris Agreement in 2015. During this time, she became known for a collaborative form of diplomacy that resulted in the unanimous adoption of the agreement by 195 countries. Her podcast, Outrage and Optimism, is essential listening for anyone involved in tackling the climate crisis. I can vouch for that. So, Christiana, the Paris Agreement called out 3 key actions: holding the increasing global average temperature to below 2 degrees, ideally to 1.5 degrees, to increase the ability to adapt and build resilience. And central to our discussion today, and I'm going to quote this verbatim, making finance flows consistent with a pathway towards low greenhouse gas emissions and climate resilient development. Now, we know how meticulously every clause of these agreements is thought through, crafted, negotiated. Was finance always going to feature so prominently in the Paris Agreement? And then if you could comment on that, and also just here we are 6 years later, give us a report card, give those of us in the finance sector a report card on how we've done against that mandate and call to arms that were given in 2015.
Yeah, okay. Thanks, Mark. Thanks very much. Lovely to be in conversation with you. Yes, definitely. Finance is absolutely at the heart of economic transformation and certainly at the heart of the Paris Agreement for a very simple reason. Wherever finance goes, there go emissions or there go emission reductions. And the kind of financing that we put into the economy is going to determine whether infrastructure is resilient or not. So it is definitely the defining feature of certainly of infrastructure, but also the defining feature of the speed and scale with which we reduce emissions. So absolutely central. Now, fast forward from 2015 to where we are today, and race to zero has become, at least among those of us who are working on climate change, a kitchen table term. But because it has become so commonplace, I think it's important to remember, what does it actually mean? Because the race to zero doesn't mean race to zero action. Quite the opposite. It means race to zero pollution, local and global. It also is important to remember that it is not a race against each other. It is not a race of one government or one country against each other, or one city against another city, or one financial institution against another. Quite differently. It is actually a race against time. That is what we have to understand. And thirdly, we have to understand that there are different to most races that we are familiar with. There are no individual winners here. It's either we all win or we all lose. And losing has such deep consequences that it's frankly not even an option. So in that understanding that we are here in the race to zero in the financial sector, How are we doing? What is the report card? Well, I would say we are probably, if I'm going to score us between 1 and 10, we're probably at somewhere like a 6 or 7, let's say. And that has actually come up from a very, very low level of effort. Over the past 1 to 2 years, we have definitely seen a dramatic shift towards improvement in the financial sector, certainly from policy, from regulatory measures, and from voluntary action. From policy, I would just like to highlight that we now have 70% of the governments of the world, 70% of the economy, committed, not yet there for sure, but committed to net zero. That is remarkable improvement. And we also know that with the exception of the Chinese-held financial institutions, all other government-held financial institutions have actually committed to pulling out of financing any new coal and increasingly any new gas. So from a policy perspective, definitely an improvement. From a regulatory perspective, I would like to point out the International Accounting Standards Board that now demands that climate change risks have to be incorporated into financial reporting. We also have, of course, the Network for Greening the Financial System, 92 members, and very excitingly, and part of Macquarie's action, the voluntary institution actions, with the Asset Owner Alliance, 42 institutions, 6.6 trillion, the Net Zero Asset Manager Initiative that includes Macquarie Asset Management, the Paris Aligned Investment Initiative, and all of this, of course, under a much broader tent, which is the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero. And we'll be hearing from Mark Carney and some of the people that are working with him on there. So are we moving? Yes. And I would say it is the financial sector that has improved most, certainly over the past 12 to 18 months, mostly because there has been a growing understanding of the high risk of keeping assets that will become or are already becoming stranded. And there's an increasing appetite to move towards investments that combine profit and purpose. So all of that is actually pretty good news. Now, does that actually get us to where we need to? No, it doesn't. Because first of all, these are all commitments, but they are not yet signed and delivered investments. It is definitely a wake-up call, but we have to not just wake up when the alarm goes off, we have to jump out of bed and actually do the morning race. And that is, Mark, where I would love to hear your input, because we understand that certainly in terms of infrastructure, anything that is invested into now, that is built now, will have emissions for at least 20 to 30 years. And we also know that we have to be at 1/2 global emissions by 2030. So how do we deal with this lock-in effect? How do we actually ensure that we close the gap between what I would perhaps very simplistically call supply and demand of capital? I hear project developers say, I can't access the capital. I hear capital asset managers and asset owners saying, we have the capital, we have the willingness, we can't find the projects. And frankly, we have totally run out of time to be in this chicken and egg situation. So what can be done, or what is being done to close that gap, to build the bridge between those two?
Thanks, Christiana. Well, certainly there's an enormous task in front of us, but we've already got things moving in the right direction, and there are a lot of things pushing us the right way. Already we've put $2.35 trillion into renewable energy projects since the Paris Agreement. Already we've started to wean ourselves off the need for public sector subsidy every time we do a renewable energy project. Increasingly, we're building projects against private sector demand. Players like an aluminium smelter in Scandinavia that's backed a number of our onshore wind projects up there. They want that clean green power, and that provides our business case. So a lot of good things already happening. And I'll also say that you're absolutely right. There's a lot of capital that wants to find its way into these assets. About $1.4 trillion of private equity dry powder right now, a record figure. And within that, the ESG theme has grown from really a whisper not so long ago to an absolute roar now. And that 18 months to 2 year backward-looking window you talk about really resonates with me. All of this has just gained huge momentum in that time. So a lot of good things happening for us. And the question is, how do we get all that money deployed in all those projects that need to happen? And I am going to hit one of the sort of traditional observations that people like me make, which is that very often what we find is that process stands in the way of us making projects happen. So wherever governments can intervene to push their project pipeline faster, either by changing environmental and other permitting requirements or access to grid, the countries that are getting that right, creating one-stop centralised shops, they're going to get a real dividend for that. But the other thing I'd point out is that in making this money meet the need and the opportunity, knowing what we're talking about, having a universal language that says, yes, that's an asset over there or a project over there that can have an impact, and telling communities that these are the sorts of assets that they should be generating. And once endorsed that way, there's money there that wants to help it and make it happen. That needs shared language. It needs a common label. And we're part of a group, an industry-wide group called Fast Infrastructure, that's also supported by the SMI's FSTF task force to create the Sustainable Infrastructure Label, which is tasked to do exactly that, a universal label that takes in the right UN Sustainable Development Goals and creates a shared language to identify these projects that should be reaching the money. And we think that's a very potent thing. Look, with the time left, I wanted to invite your insight, your guidance for us as the finance community. We've got COP26 looming. We know how important it is. We know that there are a lot of inputs and outcomes that we want to see happening in COP26. How can we as the finance community have an impact, be heard? Are we interesting to the COP26 community? How should we reach in?
Well, you're definitely interesting. I would say you're probably the most important participants there, because to a large extent, the success of COP26 will be determined by the perception that there is in that moment of the finance flows. And in that sense, I think you have to remember that there are two realities that the COP will deal with. One is the geopolitical reality, where we have to close the gap of the $100 billion that were promised years ago and that still haven't been delivered. And we're still delivering somewhere around hovering about 70 billion per year from north to south. That gap has to be closed. That is a very small gap in the scheme of things, but it has to be closed in order for the political balance to be reached in COP26. So that is the political reality. Equally important, but much larger, is the economic reality, what I call the real economy. And that's where we see the $1 trillion that have to go into the clean investments that you have actually named. So the proposal that you are working on, Mark, the FAST initiative, I think is very worthy of putting on an important platform at COP26. And I would be delighted to work with you to do that, because I think it really does begin to speak to that issue that we have of building that bridge between supply and demand. And I think it is a very, very helpful response to a frustration that so many people have been carrying for years and years. So a very exciting proposal that we should definitely highlight at COP26.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Christiana. And I guess the words I take away is that this is a race not against each other, but against time, and one that we all win together or all lose together. Let's hope it's the former. And let's hope that COP26 is a real engine of driving us towards that outcome. Thanks very much for your time.
Indeed. Thank you, Mark.